Commander Velther sat in the white room and stared at the human across the metal table. His forearms rested on the surface, claws tapping slowly against the cold steel. The scorch marks on his blue carapace still hurt from the battle 3 weeks ago. He had fought in wars for 40 years. He had seen soldiers from 100 different worlds. But he had never seen anything like the humans. The human soldier looked small in the chair. His name was Day One, according to the file. He wore a gray prisoner uniform now instead of his combat armor. His left arm was bandaged, and there was a healing cut above his eye. But his face showed no fear. That bothered Velther more than he wanted to admit. "You are Day One of the Human Defense Corps," Velther said. His translator device turned his clicking language into human words. "Unit 7, 3rd Battalion. You fought at Proxima Ridge." "Yes," Day One said. He leaned back in his chair like he was sitting in a cafe instead of a prisoner cell. "Your forces were outnumbered 5-1. You had no orbital support. Your weapons were 2 generations behind ours. Your defensive position had no strategic value." Velther leaned forward. "Yet you held for 6 days. Why?" Day One smiled. It was not a happy smile. "You want to know why you're losing, don't you?" Velther's back spine stiffened. "We are not losing. We control 70% of the contested zone. Your casualties are triple ours. Your supply lines are broken. By every measure, the coalition is winning." "Then why are you here talking to me?" Day One asked. "Why does the great Commander Velther, hero of the Sarkith campaign, winner of the Silver Talon, need to interrogate a simple foot soldier?" Velther said nothing. The human was right, of course. That was the problem. 3 weeks ago, Velther had led the assault on Proxima Ridge with complete confidence. The intelligence reports were clear. 2,000 human defenders holding a supply depot. Nothing special about the location. Just another target to capture on the way to the human core worlds. The coalition had sent 8,000 soldiers. The best warriors from 4 different species. They had artillery, air support, and orbital weapons ready to fire. It should have taken 6 hours. Instead, it took 6 days. Velther touched the burn scar on his shoulder without thinking. He remembered the moment he got it. The 3rd day of fighting, his unit had pushed into the eastern sector of the depot. They were winning. The humans were falling back. Then a human soldier had appeared in a doorway. She was wounded, bleeding from her side. But she had raised her weapon and fired. The shot had hit Velther and killed 2 soldiers behind him before she finally fell. That moment kept playing in his mind. The woman should have run. Should have surrendered. Should have saved herself. But she had stayed and fought. Why? "I will tell you something," Day One said, breaking the silence. "Your people think war is mathematics. You count soldiers and weapons and calculate who wins. That makes sense. It is logical." "War is logical," Velther said. "Resources, position, numbers. These things determine victory. For you, maybe." Day One shook his head. "But humans do not fight with math. We fight with something else. Something your people do not understand." "What? Stupidity?" Velther's voice was sharp. "Throwing away lives for no reason." "Purpose," Day One said quietly. "We fight for purpose." Velther wanted to argue, but something made him stop. He thought about the battle again. He thought about all the strange things he had seen. Humans charging into certain death to save wounded friends. Humans holding positions that had no value. Humans refusing to surrender even when surrounded. The Crithian Military Academy had taught Velther everything about war. How to read terrain. How to calculate force ratios. How to know when to attack and when to retreat. His teachers had shown him battles from 1,000 years of history. They had taught him that good soldiers think with their heads. Not their hearts, but the humans seemed to fight with their hearts more than their heads. And somehow, impossibly, it was working. "Tell me about your captain," Velther said. "Han Wu." He commanded the defense. Day One's eyes changed. There was sadness there now. "Captain Han Wu was a good man. The best officer I ever served under. He is dead?" Yes, last day of the battle. He was covering the final evacuation. Day one looked down at his hands. He could have left. He should have left. But he stayed until everyone else was safe. That is foolish, Velther said, but his voice was softer now. A commander should preserve his own life. You cannot lead if you are dead. He was not trying to survive, Day one said. He was trying to make sure we did. Velther opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. In Crithian military doctrine, a commander's first duty was to the mission. Soldiers were tools to achieve objectives. Valuable tools, yes, but tools that could be replaced. The idea of a commander sacrificing himself for ordinary soldiers made no sense, yet Haiyan Wu had done exactly that. And from what Velther had seen in the battle reports, the human soldiers had fought even harder after their captain died. Not weaker, harder. There was another soldier, Velther said, checking his data tablet. One. She held a doorway in the western building for 20 minutes alone. She killed 14 coalition soldiers before she fell. Why did she not retreat? Because her squad was behind that door, Day one said simply. They were helping civilians evacuate through the back tunnel. Someone had to hold the entrance. 1 soldier against 14. She must have known she would die. Of course she knew. Day one met Velther's eyes. That is why she did it. G1 was my friend. We trained together. We had served together for 3 years. She died so that 12 people could live. People she knew. People she cared about. Velther felt something cold in his chest. It was not pain from his wound. It was something else. Something he had not felt in many years. It might have been fear. Your people are strange, he said finally. Yes, Day one agreed. But we are still here. Still fighting? And you are still wondering why. The interrogation room fell quiet. Outside, Velther could hear the sounds of the coalition flagship. Soldiers marching. Officers giving orders. The normal sounds of military life. Everything was efficient. Everything was organized. Everything made sense, but nothing about the humans made sense. And that was the problem. Velther stood up. His forearms moved in a gesture of temporary dismissal. We will speak again tomorrow. I will be here, Day one said with that same small smile. I am not going anywhere. As Velther walked out of the interrogation room, he touched the burn scar on his shoulder again. He thought about the woman in the doorway, about Captain Haiyan Wu staying behind, about Jia 1 dying for 30 seconds of time. For 40 years, Velther had understood war. Now, for the first time, he was not sure he understood anything at all. Velther could not stop watching the battle recordings. He sat alone in his quarters late into the night cycle, playing the videos again and again. The blue light from the screen reflected off his carapace as the Battle of Proxima Ridge unfolded in front of him. Day one of the battle had started exactly as planned. Coalition artillery had hammered the human positions for 2 hours. The bombardment had destroyed half the buildings in the supply depot. Then Velther had led the first wave of ground forces. 3,000 soldiers moving in perfect formation across the open ground. The humans had opened fire at 800 meters. Their weapons were weaker than coalition rifles, but they had good aim. Velther watched his past self on the screen, ordering the advance to continue. The coalition had shields and armor. Human bullets could not stop them, except they did stop them. Not with firepower, but with tactics that made no sense. Velther paused the video. He zoomed in on a section of the human line. There, in the rubble of a collapsed warehouse, he could see a human soldier standing up. The soldier was firing at coalition forces while completely exposed. It was suicide. No trained warrior would do that. But then Velther saw why. While the standing soldier drew fire, 3 other humans were dragging wounded fighters back to cover. The standing soldier was bait. He was trading his life to save others. The tactic worked. Coalition forces focused on the obvious target. By the time they realized it was a distraction, the wounded humans were safe. The soldier who had stood up was dead, but he had accomplished his goal. Velther moved forward in the recording to Day 2. This was when he had met Captain Hyun-woo for the first time, though they had not spoken. The coalition forces had pushed deep into the depot. They had captured the main storage building and were moving toward the command center. Hyun-woo had appeared on the roof of a damaged structure. He was not hiding. He stood in plain sight with a communication device, directing his troops. Velther had ordered snipers to take the shot. It was a simple kill. The human commander was an easy target, but before the snipers could fire, 10 human soldiers had run from cover and formed a wall with their bodies between Hyun-woo and the coalition forces. They knew they would die. They did it anyway. 3 of them fell before Hyun-woo finally moved to safety. On the recording, Velther heard his own voice giving orders. Why would they do that? Why sacrifice themselves for one officer? His second-in-command had answered, "Humans are emotional. They do not think clearly." But watching it now, Velther was not sure that was the answer. Those soldiers had not acted from emotion. They had acted from decision. A clear choice to value their captain's life above their own. The video continued to day 3. This was the day Velther got his wound. The day everything started to go wrong. Coalition forces had control of most of the depot by then. The humans were down to maybe 800 fighters. They were running out of ammunition. Medical supplies were gone. The logical choice was surrender. Any military academy in the galaxy would teach that, but the humans kept fighting. Velther watched his tactical display from that day. Red markers showed coalition positions. Blue markers showed human positions. The red was everywhere. The blue was scattered and weak. Victory was certain. Then the blue markers started moving in ways that made no sense. Small groups of humans abandoned their defensive positions. They ran toward coalition forces instead of away from them. At first, Velther thought it was a chaotic retreat. Soldiers panicking and running, but it was not panic. It was coordination. One group of 5 humans had attacked a coalition artillery position. They had no chance of capturing it, but they occupied the gun crews long enough that the artillery could not fire. This gave other human forces time to evacuate civilians from a nearby shelter. The 5 humans died. All of them. But 200 civilians escaped. In the recording, Velther heard himself shouting orders. Stop them! Cut off the escape route! But his forces could not stop the humans. Every time coalition soldiers moved toward the fleeing civilians, another small group of human fighters would appear and attack. They would die, but they would buy time. Always buying time. Always giving other humans a chance to live. Velther fast-forwarded to the moment he got wounded. The eastern sector. His unit pushing through rubble. Winning easily. There, he paused the video. The woman in the doorway. Her name had been So Min, according to the casualty reports. She was 24 years old. She had been a communications specialist, not even a combat soldier. But when coalition forces had broken through her unit's position, she had picked up a rifle and held a doorway. Velther zoomed in on her face. Even through the grainy video, he could see she was afraid. But she did not run. She raised her weapon and fired. She hit Velther. She hit 2 soldiers behind him. Then return fire cut her down. The whole thing took 8 seconds. Behind that doorway, 6 wounded humans and 1 medic named Taemin had escaped through a back passage. Somin had given them 8 seconds. It had been enough. Velther turned off the recording. He sat in the dark and thought about Somin. She could have run. She could have surrendered. She could have saved herself, but she had stayed. He called up another file. This one was from day 4. A forward observation post had captured video of Sergeant Taemin that same day. The same medic who had escaped through the doorway, So Min, had died defending. In the video, Taemin was treating wounded soldiers in a destroyed building. Coalition artillery was hitting nearby. The building was shaking apart. Everyone could see it was about to collapse. The wounded humans could not move on their own. Taemin started dragging them out one by one. Coalition forces were advancing. Time was running out. Another medic shouted at Taemin to leave the last 3 wounded soldiers. They could not be saved. Tae-Min had ignored the order. He went back into the building. He pulled out 1 soldier. Went back, pulled out another. The building was coming down. Everyone was screaming at him to stop. He went back for the third soldier. The building collapsed as he dragged the last wounded human clear. Taemin was injured by falling debris. But all 3 soldiers survived. Valthor played this video 3 times. He tried to understand the thinking. By Krithian military logic, Taemin had acted foolishly. He had risked a trained medic to save 3 soldiers who might not survive their injuries anyway. The mathematics did not work, but humans did not use mathematics. They used something else. Valthor switched to the final battle reports. Day 6, the last day. The day Captain Hyun-woo died. By then, fewer than 300 human fighters remained. They were surrounded. Their ammunition was almost gone. Coalition forces had them trapped in the Central Command bunker. It was over. Valthor had offered surrender terms. They were generous. Medical treatment. Fair imprisonment. No executions. The smart choice was to accept. Hyun-woo had refused. The final assault had cost 800 coalition lives to dig the humans out of that bunker. 800 soldiers dead to defeat 300. The ratio was wrong. It should have been reversed. Valthor watched the video of Hyun-woo's last stand. The human captain had been at the main entrance of the bunker. He was firing a rifle he had taken from a dead soldier. His own weapon was empty. He had wounds on his chest and legs. He should have been dead already, but he was covering an evacuation. Behind him, the last surviving humans were escaping through maintenance tunnels. Children, elderly, wounded soldiers. People who could not fight. Hyun-woo was buying them time. He bought them 4 minutes. In those 4 minutes, 112 humans escaped. They made it to the tunnels and vanished into the underground network. Coalition forces never found them. Hyun-woo died when the bunker entrance collapsed. He was still firing when the explosion took him. Valthor closed the video file. He sat in the darkness and listened to his own breathing. Outside his window, he could see the stars. Beautiful and cold and distant, he had fought in 17 major wars. He had won battles on a dozen worlds. He had medals and honors and respect. Everyone said he was one of the greatest commanders in coalition history, but he had never seen soldiers fight the way humans fought. Krithian warriors were brave. Sarkith shock troops were fierce. Yandari pilots were skilled. But they all fought for the same reasons: duty, honor, glory. These were good reasons. Valthor believed in them. Humans fought for different reasons. They fought for the person next to them. They fought to give others a chance to live. They fought because someone had to, and they had decided it would be them. So Dashmin staying in that doorway. Taemin going back into a collapsing building. Hyun-woo dying to buy 4 minutes. These actions made no tactical sense. They violated every principle of military efficiency. They were stupid and wasteful and heroic, and Valthor did not understand them at all. That was what frightened him most. He had 40 years of military experience. He understood war. War was his profession, his life, his purpose, but the humans were showing him that maybe he understood nothing. Valthor remembered his first day at the Krithian War Academy. He had been young then, only 12 cycles old. His carapace had been bright blue without any scars. His back spines had been small and soft. He had been eager and afraid and proud all at the same time. The academy building had been enormous, made of black stone from the old mountains. 10,000 young Krithians trained there at any time. It was the heart of the military. The place where warriors were made. His instructor had been a female named Kreshtar. She was old, with a gray carapace covered in battle scars. She had fought in 30 campaigns, lost 1 arm in combat. She was a legend. On that first day, Kreshtar had gathered all the new students in the main hall. Valthor remembered her words exactly. They were carved into his memory like words carved into stone. "You are here to learn war," she had said. War is not about anger. It is not about hate. It is about calculation. The side with better numbers wins. The side with better position wins. The side with better strategy wins. If you understand the mathematics of battle, you cannot lose. She had pointed to a screen showing an old battlefield. See this? The enemy had courage. They had spirit. They had heart. And they all died because they did not have mathematics. The lesson was clear. Emotion was weakness. Logic was strength. Velther had believed that. For 40 years, now he was not sure what he believed. He stood in front of his bathroom mirror looking at his reflection. The burn scar on his shoulder was healing, but it would never fully disappear. He had many scars now. Each one was a story. Each one was a lesson learned, but this scar felt different. This one bothered him. He thought about So-Min in that doorway again. She had looked afraid. But she had stayed. Why? What calculation had she made? What mathematics said to die for 8 seconds? Velther picked up his military medal case. Inside were 15 decorations. Silver Talon for bravery. Crystal Star for strategic excellence. Blood Ribbon for wounds in service. Each one represented a battle, a victory, a moment of professional excellence. He had earned these through logic, through planning, through understanding the mathematics of war, but none of his medals represented what So-Min had done, what Haiyan-Wu had done, what those human soldiers had done every single day of that 6-day battle. There was no medal for buying 8 seconds with your life. No award for going back into a collapsing building. No honor for dying so others could run. Maybe there should be. Velther closed the medal case. He felt tired, though he had slept well. It was not physical tiredness. It was something deeper. Something in his mind, or maybe his spirit, if Krithians had spirits. He thought back to his 5th year at the academy. Advanced tactics class. Kreshtar had taught them about acceptable losses. Every battle has a cost, she had explained. You must calculate what you are willing to pay. If capturing a position costs 10 soldiers but saves 100, you pay the cost. If holding a position costs 100 soldiers but only saves 10, you retreat. This is not cruelty. This is efficiency. It had made perfect sense at the time. The class had studied famous battles. They had learned about the defense of Krathkar, where Commander Thelvin had sacrificed 200 soldiers to hold a bridge. The sacrifice had allowed 10,000 civilians to evacuate. The mathematics worked. 200 for 10,000. A good trade, but Thelvin had not asked for volunteers. He had simply ordered 200 soldiers to stay and die. They had obeyed because that was their duty. Velther wondered what would have happened if Thelvin had asked for volunteers instead. Would anyone have stayed? He thought about Haiyan-Wu's last stand. The human captain had not ordered anyone to stay with him. In fact, he had ordered everyone else to leave. But 20 soldiers had stayed anyway. They had chosen to die with their captain. Chosen. That was the word that mattered. Velther walked to his desk and pulled up the casualty reports from Proxima Ridge, human casualties. He had read these before, but now he read them differently. Private Sang-Woo, age 22. Killed on day 5 while holding an observation post alone for 4 hours. He had called in artillery coordinates that destroyed 3 coalition vehicles. Then he had died when his position was overrun. The report noted that Sang-Woo's entire unit had been killed 6 hours earlier. He could have retreated. Instead, he had stayed at his post because there were wounded civilians in a shelter 200 meters behind his position. He had believed reinforcements would come for them. Reinforcements did come. 3 hours after Sang-Woo died, the civilians were saved. Velther stared at the report. Sang-Woo had stayed at his post for 4 hours, alone, knowing he would probably die. Because he thought help might come for people he had never met. What kind of soldier does that? He scrolled through more names. Lieutenant Beora, age 29. Killed on day 4 while coordinating a defensive retreat. She had stayed on an exposed roof to direct her platoon's withdrawal. Sniper fire had killed her, but her entire platoon escaped. Corporal Min-seok, age 25. Killed on day 3 while defending a medical station. He had held a collapsed hallway alone against 14 coalition soldiers while doctors evacuated patients through the back. He killed 6 coalition soldiers before he fell. Private Yunji, age 20. Killed on day 2 while trying to rescue a wounded comrade from no man's land. She reached the wounded soldier and was dragging him back when artillery struck. Both died. Page after page of names. Page after page of humans choosing to die for others. In Crithian military culture there were heroes. Soldiers who performed exceptional acts of bravery. But those acts were always strategic. Always calculated to achieve a specific objective. A Crithian hero would never waste his life on something hopeless, but humans seem to have a different definition of waste. Velthor thought about his own career, his own battles, his own moments of decision. In the Sarkith campaign, he had been ordered to hold a mountain pass. The enemy had superior numbers. His commanding officer had calculated that Velthor's unit could delay the enemy for 6 hours before being overrun. Those 6 hours would allow the main army to retreat and regroup. Velthor had held for 6 hours and 15 minutes. Then he had retreated with his surviving soldiers. He had lost 40% of his unit. It was acceptable. The mathematics worked. He had received the silver talon for that action, but what if he had been human? Would a human commander have retreated? Or would he have stayed until every soldier was dead, buying every possible second? Velthor did not know the answer. That bothered him. He closed the casualty reports and opened a different file. Human cultural documents, literature, history, art. The Coalition had collected these for intelligence purposes. But few military officers ever read them. Velthor started reading. There were stories about something called the Alamo, a battle where a few hundred humans had defended a fort against thousands. They had all died. The battle was a complete defeat. But humans still told stories about it, still celebrated it, still taught their children that those defenders were heroes. There were poems about a place called Thermopylae. 300 soldiers holding a mountain pass. All of them dying. Complete tactical failure. But humans remembered their names thousands of years later. There were songs about ships that went down fighting, about last stands, about rearguard actions where everyone died. Humans celebrated their defeats as much as their victories. Maybe more. Velthor tried to imagine Crithian culture doing the same. It was impossible. A defeat was a failure. Something to learn from, not celebrate. The idea of honoring soldiers who lost made no sense, but to humans, it was not about winning or losing. It was about something else. Something Velthor was starting to understand, but did not have words for yet. He read a human poem. It was about a soldier dying in a field, and his last thought being that his death had meaning because it protected something he loved. Velthor. Read the poem 3 times. In Crithian thinking, death in battle had meaning if it achieved a military objective. If you died capturing a position, your death had purpose. If you died for no tactical gain, your death was wasted. But this poem suggested that meaning came from something else. Not from what you accomplished, but from what you were trying to protect. The distinction seemed small. But Velthor was beginning to realize it was enormous. He turned off his computer and sat in the darkness. Outside, the ship's engines hummed steadily. The Coalition flagship was heading to the next battle zone. More fighting. More casualties. More calculations of acceptable losses. Velthor touched his burn scar again. He thought about So Min, about Hyungwoo, about Sang-woo waiting alone at his post. For 40 years he had known exactly what war was. He had understood the rules, the mathematics, the logic. Now he was not sure he understood anything, and somewhere deep in his chest, in the place where Crithians might have hearts, Velthor felt something that might have been respect. Or fear, or maybe both. The Coalition War Council met in a chamber that was designed to be impressive. The ceiling was 30 meters high. The walls were made of polished stone from 7 different conquered worlds. Flags from 100 member species hung from silver poles. Everything about the room said power and authority and inevitable victory. Velthor stood at the presentation podium and felt very small. Around the circular table sat the most powerful military commanders in the galaxy. General Thakran of the Crithian forces, Admiral Veskoth of the Yandari fleet, Marshal Krondith of the Sarkith ground armies, 20 other high-ranking officers from 20 other species. They were all staring at Velthor. He had been summoned to present his findings about the human defensive capabilities. It was supposed to be a routine intelligence briefing. But as Velthor had prepared his report, he had realized it was much more than that. He was about to tell the most powerful military force in the galaxy that they did not understand their enemy at all. "Commander Velthor," General Thakaran said. His voice was formal and cold. "You have spent 3 weeks analyzing the Battle of Proxima Ridge. You have interrogated human prisoners. You have reviewed all combat data. What are your conclusions?" Velthor activated the display screens around the room. Battle statistics appeared, casualty ratios, resource expenditures, tactical analyses. "The numbers are clear," Velthor began. "We inflicted 3,400 casualties on the enemy. We lost 800 soldiers. By traditional measures, this was a decisive coalition victory." Some of the commanders nodded. This was what they expected to hear. "However," Velthor continued, "these numbers do not tell the complete story. The battle was supposed to last 6 hours. It lasted 6 days. We deployed forces sufficient to overcome the enemy in a matter of hours. Instead, we required sustained combat operations and significant additional resources." "The humans fought well," Marshal Krondeath said with a dismissive wave. "This is not surprising. Even weak enemies sometimes resist longer than expected." "With respect, Marshal, it was not just resistance. It was something different." Velthor pulled up video footage. "I want to show you something." The screens displayed the footage of Somin in the doorway. The young communications specialist standing exposed, firing at coalition forces. Her death. The escape of the wounded soldiers behind her. "This soldier died to buy 8 seconds, Velthor said. 8 seconds that allowed 6 wounded fighters and 1 medic to escape. "Foolish," Admiral Veskoth said. "She threw away her life for no strategic gain." "That is what I thought initially," Velthor said. "But I was wrong." Those 6 wounded soldiers returned to combat later. The medic treated hundreds of other wounded during the remaining days of battle. That 8 seconds had value. Just not value we know how to calculate. He showed more footage. Taemin rescuing wounded from the collapsing building. Sang-woo holding his position alone for 4 hours. Han-woo's final stand. "In every case," Velthor explained, "humans made choices that seemed tactically unsound. They sacrificed themselves for gains that appear minimal. But the cumulative effect was that they held a position that should have fallen in ours." "So they are emotional?" General Thakaran said. "This is a weakness we can exploit." "I do not believe it is a weakness." Velthor's words made the room go silent. "I believe it is a weapon." The commanders stared at him. Some looked confused. Some looked angry. None looked convinced. Velthor took a breath and continued. "I have studied human culture and history. They have a concept they call irrational combat persistence. They do not surrender even when surrender is logical. They do not retreat even when retreat makes tactical sense. They continue fighting beyond the point where any other species would accept defeat. Then they will simply die in greater numbers," Marshal Krondeath said. "This makes our job easier, not harder. Does it?" Velthor pulled up a tactical map. "Look at our campaign progress over the past 6 months. We have captured 70% of the contested territory. Our casualties are lower than the enemy's. By every metric we are winning. We are winning," General Thakaran said firmly. "Are we?" Velthor zoomed in on specific battles. "Each engagement takes longer than projected. Each victory costs more than calculated. We are winning every battle but spending resources at an unsustainable rate. If this pattern continues, we will run out of soldiers before we run out of territory to capture." The room became very quiet, Velthor continued, his voice steady. "The problem is that humans do not fight like us. When we calculate acceptable losses, we think in terms of strategic objectives. We ask, what is this position worth? Humans ask a different question. They ask, who are we protecting?" He played audio from the interrogation with Day 1. The prisoner's voice filled the chamber. We fight for each other. A soldier named G1 died holding a doorway not because it was strategically important, but because her squad needed 30 seconds to evacuate civilians. The coalition calculates acceptable losses. Humans calculate acceptable sacrifices. Admiral Veskoth leaned forward. This is just propaganda. All soldiers claim to fight for noble reasons. I thought so too, Welther said. But then I analyzed the pattern of human combat behavior across multiple battles. Not just Proxima Ridge, but 20 other engagements. He displayed a comparison chart. In standard military doctrine, soldiers fight hardest when defending strategic positions. When defending tactically worthless positions, morale collapses quickly. But humans show the opposite pattern. They fight hardest when defending positions that contain civilians, wounded soldiers, or trapped comrades. Strategic value is secondary to them. The chart showed battle after battle where humans had held positions far longer than military logic suggested. Food depots that had no strategic importance but contained civilian refugees. Medical stations with no tactical value but full of wounded soldiers. Evacuation routes that led nowhere militarily important but saved hundreds of lives. They are not following military logic, Welther said. They are following a different logic? One based on relationships rather than resources. This is absurd, Marshal Krondith said. Wars are won through superior force and strategy, not through feelings. That is what I believed, Welther said quietly. That is what I was taught. But I am no longer certain it is true. He pulled up his final piece of evidence. I want you to consider this. In the Battle of Proxima Ridge, Captain Hien Wu could have surrendered on day 5. He would have saved 800 human lives. We offered generous terms. But he refused. Because he was stubborn, General Thakran said. No, because every single one of his soldiers knew that if they were wounded, if they were trapped, if they needed help, their captain would not abandon them. This created a psychological effect that we do not have in coalition forces. It created absolute trust. Welther let that sink in before continuing. When a coalition soldier is wounded, he knows his comrades will attempt rescue if tactically feasible. If rescue is too costly, he will be left behind. This is logical and efficient. But it also means every soldier knows he might be abandoned. As it should be, Admiral Veskoth said. Soldiers understand the necessities of war. Humans understand something else. They know their comrades will attempt rescue regardless of the tactical cost. This is inefficient by our standards. But it means no human soldier ever feels abandoned. No human soldier ever wonders if he is expendable. The room was silent now. Some of the commanders looked uncomfortable. Welther pressed on. We teach our soldiers that they are valuable tools. Humans teach their soldiers that they are irreplaceable individuals. We create efficient armies. Humans create armies that refuse to break. He played one final video. It showed a group of 20 human soldiers defending a crashed medical transport. The transport had no strategic value. The wounded inside could not be moved. The situation was hopeless. The 20 soldiers held for 2 days. All of them died. But they held until reinforcements arrived and evacuated every wounded soldier from that transport. By our logic, those 20 soldiers wasted their lives, Welther said. But by human logic, they saved 40 lives. And more importantly, they proved to every other human soldier that no one gets left behind. General Thakran stood up. His forearms were stiff with anger. What exactly are you suggesting, Commander? Welther met his eyes. I am suggesting that we are fighting an enemy we do not understand. We think we are fighting soldiers who make poor tactical decisions. But we are actually fighting soldiers who have weaponized loyalty, courage, and love. These things are not weaknesses. They are force multipliers that we have no counter for. Love? Marshal Krondith laughed. It was a harsh sound. You think love wins wars? I think it might, Welther said. When a Krithian soldier dies, we mark him as a casualty and move on. When a human soldier dies, every soldier who knew him fights harder. Every human soldier carries the memory of dead comrades into battle. They are fighting for the living and the dead at the same time. The room exploded in argument. Commanders shouting over each other. Some agreed with Velther. Most did not. The debate raged for 20 minutes. Finally, General Thakran called for order. Enough, Commander Velther. Your analysis is noted. But your conclusions are rejected. The Coalition has won wars across the galaxy using proven military doctrine. Velther returned to the interrogation room one final time. It had been 2 days since his presentation to the War Council. 2 days of silence. No new orders. No acknowledgement of his report. Just silence. He knew what that meant. The Coalition had made its decision. They would continue fighting the war the same way they always had. Velther's warnings would be filed away and forgotten. Day One sat in the same chair as always. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes. But he still had that small smile when Velther entered. "Commander," Day One said, "I wondered if you would come back?" Velther sat down across from him. For a moment neither spoke. The white room was quiet except for the hum of the ship's engines. "I told them," Velther said finally. "The War Council. I told them everything I learned about how your people fight." "And?" Day One leaned forward slightly. They did not listen. Day One nodded slowly. He did not look surprised. "What will happen to me?" "The military tribunal has found you guilty of war crimes. They say you refused to surrender a civilian shelter, resulting in Coalition casualties. The sentence is execution." "When?" Day One's voice was calm. 3 days. Day One sat back in his chair. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Can I ask you something, Commander?" "Yes. In 40 years of war, have you ever fought for something you believed in? Or only for things you were ordered to believe in?" The question hit Velther like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. He had no answer. "I thought so," Day One said softly. "That is the difference between us." Velther looked at the human prisoner. This young soldier who would be dead in 3 days. This person who had held a shelter against impossible odds because civilians were inside. This human who had fought not because orders said to, but because he believed it was right. "Tell me something," Velther said. "The shelter you refused to surrender. How many civilians were inside?" 42, Day One said. "Mostly children and elderly. Some wounded. And you had how many soldiers?" 8, including me. 8 soldiers against 200 Coalition troops. You had to know you could not win. We did not need to win, Day One said. We needed to hold until evacuation arrived. We held for 6 hours. Evacuation arrived after 5 hours and 40 minutes. All 42 civilians escaped. And your soldiers? 5 died. 3 of us were captured. Day One looked down at his hands. Their names were Kyungsoo, Haewon, Jaesung, Youngmi, and Donghyun. They were my friends. We trained together. We fought together. They died protecting children they had never met. The Coalition says this was a war crime, that you should have surrendered. Maybe by your laws, Day One said. But by human laws, we did exactly what we were supposed to do. We protected innocent people. That is what soldiers are for. Velther thought about his military academy training, about Kreshtar teaching him that soldiers were tools for achieving strategic objectives, about learning to calculate acceptable losses and optimal force deployment. None of that training had prepared him for this. For a soldier who thought his job was to protect innocent people, not to achieve strategic objectives. Your people will lose this war, Velther said. You know that, don't you? The Coalition has more ships, more soldiers, more resources. The mathematics are clear. Maybe, Day One said. But we will never stop fighting. That is what you do not understand. You can kill us all, every single human, and the last one will still be fighting. Because we are not fighting to win. We are fighting because some things are worth dying for. Like what? Velther asked. What is worth dying for? Day One smiled. It was a sad smile. Each other, our families, our homes, our freedom. The belief that we should protect those who cannot protect themselves. These things do not show up on your tactical displays, Commander. But they are more real than any weapon. Velthor stood up. He walked to the door, then stopped. He stood there for a long moment, his back to Day One. I am going to do something, Velthor said slowly. Something that will end my military career. Possibly end my life. But I'm going to do it anyway. What? Day One asked. Velthor turned around. I am going to falsify the execution report. I'm going to say you died during interrogation. Then I'm going to arrange for you to escape. Day One stared at him. Why would you do that? Because in 40 years of military service, I have never fought for something I believed in. I have only followed orders. I have only calculated acceptable losses. I have been a perfect soldier according to Krithian standards. Velthor touched his burn scar. But I do not want to be that soldier anymore. They will catch you. They will kill you, probably. Velthor felt strangely calm about this. But for the first time in 40 years, I will have done something that mattered. Not something that was efficient. Not something that achieved strategic objectives. Something that was right. Day One stood up. I don't understand. Why risk everything for one enemy soldier? Velthor thought about So Min in the doorway, about Haiyan Wu's last stand, about Sang Wu waiting alone at his post, about all the humans who had died at Proxima Ridge not because they had to, but because they chose to. Because you taught me something, Velthor said. Your people taught me that there are things more important than winning, more important than efficiency, more important than following orders. What things? Purpose, meaning, the belief that one life has value beyond its tactical utility. Velthor walked back to the table. For 40 years I have been a weapon. The Coalition pointed me at enemies and I eliminated them. I was very good at it, but I was not a person. I was just a tool. He looked at Day One. You are not a tool. Han Wu was not a tool? None of your soldiers were tools. You were people fighting for things you believed in. And even though you lost the battle, even though most of you died, you were more alive in those 6 days than I have been in 40 years. Day One's eyes were wet. My friends died. Yes, and you carry them with you. Their memory gives you purpose. Their sacrifice had meaning. That is what I did not understand before. That is what the Coalition will never understand. Velthor activated his communication device. I am calling a transport pilot I trust. She will take you to the neutral zone. From there, you can make your way back to human space. What will happen to you? When they discover what I did, I will face court-martial. Probably execution. Velthor felt surprisingly peaceful about this. But that is acceptable. Some things are worth the cost. Day One stood up and walked around the table. He held out his hand in the human gesture of respect. Velthor looked at it for a moment, then reached out with one of his 4 arms and clasped the human's hand. Thank you, Day One said quietly. No, thank you. You and your people have given me something I thought I lost a long time ago. Or maybe never had. What is that? A reason to fight that comes from inside. Not from orders or duty or efficiency. A reason that is mine. 2 hours later, Velthor watched from an observation deck as a small transport ship left the flagship. Inside was Day One, along with false identity documents and enough supplies to reach the neutral zone. The transport pilot was Yelthin, an old friend who owed Velthor several favors. She had not asked questions. She had simply agreed to help. Velthor knew he probably had 2 or 3 days before the escape was discovered. He could run. He could try to hide. But he would not. Running was the logical choice. The efficient choice, but Velthor was done making choices based only on logic and efficiency. Instead, he went to his quarters and wrote a long report. Not for the War Council? They would not read it anyway. This report was for himself. A record of everything he had learned. Everything he had realized. He wrote about So Min and Haiyan Wu and Sang Wu. He wrote about the humans who died buying seconds and minutes and hours for others. He wrote about how the coalition was losing a war they thought they were winning. He wrote about how humans had weaponized something the coalition did not believe in: love, loyalty, the willingness to die for others, not because strategy demanded it, but because it was the right thing to do. When he finished, Velther saved the file to a secure location. Maybe someday someone would find it and read it. Maybe it would make a difference. Probably not, but he had written it anyway. 3 days later, Coalition security discovered that Day 1 was missing. They came for Velther immediately. He did not resist. He went with them calmly. At his court-martial, they asked him why he had done it. Why he had thrown away a distinguished career, medals, honors, everything he had earned in 40 years of service. Velther thought about the question. Then he gave them the truth. Because for 40 years I was a perfect soldier. I followed every order. I never questioned the mission. I calculated acceptable losses and achieved strategic objectives. I was exactly what you wanted me to be. He paused, looking at the faces of his judges. But I was never a person. I was just a weapon. And I am tired of being a weapon. They found him guilty. The sentence was execution. Velther accepted it without argument. As they led him away, he touched his burn scar one last time. He thought about all the battles he had fought, all the wars he had won. None of them had mattered as much as those 8 seconds So-Min bought in a doorway. None of them had meant as much as Hyun-Woo's 4-minute last stand for 40 years. Velther had been a perfect soldier in a military that valued efficiency above all else.